Hello, hello. This is Ines O'Donovan from day one of the 19th Aesthetic and Anti-Aging Medicine World Congress in Monaco. So, I am sharing with you now my top three things, and I want to focus on anti-aging, the Russian and Japanese way. I want to talk a little bit about nutrition and aging and some of the things you can do straight away. And I want to also share some of my thoughts with you about the exhibition. So I hope that the streaming is working. It's the first time that I'm actually streaming live into YouTube and Facebook. And I'm not 100% sure if it's actually working into LinkedIn at the same time. So let's see. Anyway, let's get started. So, day one, the first time after 2 years that the AMWC is live again in Monaco in the Grimaldi Forum. And the first thing I did look at today was anti-aging, then the Russian and the Japanese way. So, what are the differences? Of course, it also depends on the speakers. So I'm just drawing the conclusions based on those speakers. It could be completely different, but one of the differences that I observed was really that even though all of them focus on a holistic approach, like both countries or practitioners, experts in both countries seem to focus on a holistic approach. There seems to be a little bit more of strengthening the body approach, more physical, more functional approach, more novel technology approach, looking at Russia. When you then, in comparison, look at Japan, it seems to be a little bit more of what I would call almost like a softer approach, more of a preventative approach, looking at appearance. Yes, there is a lot of that is actually not just preventative, that is going into actual surgery, and I share a little bit more about that in a moment. But there's a lot of talk about glycation, about nutrition, about Zen, about meditation. So two quite different ways looking at something that at the end of the day is intended to improve our health, slow aging, and live longer. So, when we look at Russia, there was a lot of talk by all the experts about using different types of devices. So, there was, for instance, one device that I would call an earable, so like a wearable that you actually put into your earlobe. It's not out yet. It's called Unsight, and it's meant to be launched next year. And what it does, it's supposed to check your blood glucose on a constant basis. So it's a continuous blood glucose monitor, basically, in non-invasive. So we have been seeing a lot of companies trying to develop those type of solutions because it is important to measure our blood glucose, our blood sugar. But at the same time, those devices that are measuring continuously are so far pretty much all of them are invasive. That means you have to put them in, and they're quite expensive. So we have otherwise seen of those non-invasive approaches. I've seen watches, I've seen patches and other things. So it's actually first time that I've seen one that would work in the ear, or like on the earlobe. Uh, then, in addition to that, there was also talk about transcranial stimulation, especially for stress management. There was talk about cryotherapy, so like using the heat or cold in this case in order to improve body and mind. And also, what was quite interesting, there was one device that was called the magnetoturboton, which I think is also supposed to be launched next year, that uses magnetism in order to, for instance, reduce inflammation to bring all over body improvement. So then let's look at Japan. as I mentioned, it seems to be more what feels like more of a preventative, more of a soft approach. So, for instance, one of the recommendations that were given there was that you do want to avoid glycation. So, glycation, as you know, is like basically the caramelization of your insides, if you want, because then they can break. There's a lot more damage that can happen, etc. So it's something that you want to avoid, and that comes from basically sugar in your body. And some of the, let's say, nutrients that you can use, there's, for instance, pomegranate, and you can do that right away, So pomegranate, rosemary, water chestnut, and noni. So these are all ways that can help you to break down those, what they're called, glycation end products, AGs. So another approach is to trying to keep your telomeres long. So you have surely heard about telomeres. So over time, as we age, they get shorter and shorter and shorter until the cells die. But there are ways to actually lengthen those telomeres again, and that's called telomerase. So and again, there are different ways in which that can be done. But the best way, of course, is if you avoid that they shorten too much in the first place. And one typical way in Japan seems to be related to vitamin D. And they, for instance, looked at or showed a study that vitamin D, like 2,000 units of vitamin D per day, actually improved telomerase. So improve the actual lengthening of your telomeres. And one thing that's very typical in Japan is they quite often eat their salmon, and one fillet of salmon has 1,500 IUs of vitamin D. So you have the choice: take some vitamin D supplements or eat some salmon or other things that contain vitamin D. And another thing that we have all heard about is like the Zen approach, I would almost call it, to aging, to living healthy. And they have shown, again, in a study, that using meditation, you can actually lengthen your telomeres. Relaxation itself is not enough. So as much as we would wish to just, it's like, because not everybody can meditate. So just relaxing, unfortunately, doesn't do it. Very sad, but that's science. That's what the research shows. What is interesting, but also quite logical in a way, is where they have seen the biggest difference from before and after is with people who have a personality type that is very high in neuroticism, low in agreeableness, so they don't tend to agree very much. They tend to be very neurotic, but they also tend to be quite open to things. So, of course, for some people who are, for instance, not as neurotic, who tend to agree more, they probably take things easier. So the changes might not be as big. So they might probably start at a better point in the first place. So the one thing, though, where there is quite a big difference is across countries, and that's globally actually, and Japan, is in the way they use surgery for aesthetic procedures. Globally, about 45% of aesthetic procedures are surgeries. But in Japan, only 13% are surgeries. So there's a huge difference in the percentage of surgeries they use. And most of the time, most of those surgeries in Japan are related to the upper eyelid. So it's primarily an opening of the upper eyelids. And there's a strong focus of women there in Japan on that. Okay. Number one, done. Let's look at nutrition and aging. What are some of the tips that have been shared today that you can use right away? We, of course, all know that nutrition is super, super, super important for healthy living and aging. And our microbiome has, we have been talking about that for years, and it has been made clear, I think, for everybody at this stage that we really need a very healthy microbiome. Unfortunately, it's not as common yet to actually check, for instance, the diversity of our microbiome, the type of bacteria that we have, etc. Because what you want is that you have a very large diversity of your microbiome. And there was, for instance, in one talk, there was the idea shared: the dirtier a child, the better it actually is. And the meaning behind that is that if a child, goes out in the dirt and does or whatever, that also strengthens the microbiome. It helps to improve the diversity and also the quality, and also then at the end probably the type of bacteria. And those bacteria, especially, they change as we age. And one of the statistics that was mentioned is that 70% of mortality, so basically diseases that relate in some way to the microbiome that eventually lead to death, are really through the quality of your microbiome. So 70%. So you have a very, very strong way to actually influence your own health, and with that aging and death, or primarily trying to stay alive. So, and when we talk about nutrition and the aging and the microbiome, then of course our microbiome is also related to our brain health. Just think about neurotransmitters, about the mood, about the body's ability to extract nutrients, etc. And Marina Matkova, for instance, she said, "We are what we absorb." And that's so, so true, because even if we want to eat all the nutrients and we might take supplements, etc., if our body can't absorb them anymore, it's no use, really. So it is really important to pay attention to your body's ability to absorb to a large variety of different nutrients that you take in. And I share a few in a moment. And also that you actually give your body, in a way, the peace of mind that your body gets opportunity to really absorb. So what does that mean? So one of the things, again, that Marina Matkova said was that in her experience with her clients, very often they have taken, different types of supplements, and they had been recommended to do meditation, but going back to the Japanese way, where we have seen it's really helpful for telomerase, etc., it's very difficult for many people to do that, to do meditation, to manage their stress better, etc. But if we're not doing it, our body might never absorb the nutrients. Our body might never be able to really build a very healthy microbiome. So that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about nutrition. So let's talk about keeping the brain healthy. Let's focus on that, because a lot of people have a strong interest in that. I personally do. So I want to keep my brain very healthy as I age. And one of the main things is to stay hydrated. So just 2% of dehydration actually limit your capacity of to memorize things and your concentration. Dehydration can actually show, make similar signs like dementia. if you're dehydrated. So it's super important to really stay hydrated. Then fatty acids. So fat. Fat is important. I do not understand why there has been so much bad talk about fats for such a long time. Fat is absolutely healthy for our body, but as with so many things, we are going through cycles. It's like butter used to be great, then it used to be bad, and then now it's good again. And there are so many examples where things change as science develops. And it's not a bad thing that science discovers new things, and we might come back to things that didn't seem right before. But maybe often it is a way of doing things slightly differently, or having slightly different types of, for instance, fats. And when you talk, for instance, about DHA, which is a very good fat for your body, then if in a study they showed that 250 milligram a day actually could improve the working memory by 23%. So fat in this case is super, super healthy. But do avoid, like, for instance, trans fatty acids, because one of the examples that was mentioned was it could lead to a 50% risk of depression, and related to that, memory decline. So obviously not something you want. Then do take your vitamins and minerals, so especially your B vitamins. They're super, super important for your brain health. And when you talk about minerals, one of the minerals that tends to stand out again and again is magnesium threonate. It is super healthy for your brain, and your brain needs it. Other interesting nootropics are phosphatidylserine, PS, Bacopa monnieri, and rhodiola. But don't forget your polyphenols. These are some of the most effective ways to not only keep your brain young, but also your overall body. And they tend to be some of the tastiest nutrients you can have. Just think about cocoa. Think about some berries like blueberries, etc. And also think about green tea. Okay, not everybody likes green tea, but then there are also extracts that can help you, that you actually can take as a supplement. So it's super healthy. And also do not forget curcumin. So polyphenols are amazing for your health and for aging well. Okay, last point from day one. I did walk through the exhibition, and before I walked through the exhibition, I was not sure what I would expect. I did not think there would be an awful lot of companies there, because still a lot of countries, people cannot travel. Basically the companies are telling their employees, no, you can't travel, or countries are actually limiting other countries to travel, etc. So I was actually astonished how many companies are actually at the AMWC here now in Monaco. And yes, there are less. So there's no discussion about that. But there were still more than I expected. It's primarily the small companies that seem to be missing. And what is interesting is that has created a shuffling of the actual spaces that companies use. In previous years, so not last year, but the years before, when we had those live events, the same companies pretty much always stayed in the same place. And while that is still true for some companies, others have moved around. So that was quite interesting. It was a bit like, when you go to the supermarket and they change everything. Suddenly everything is somewhere else, and then you have to find it. Or you discover new ones because they were in a place that you used to go to before, but the product wasn't there anymore. So that was the same now with here AMWC. And one of the companies that I thought was, for me, the most interesting, because just keep in mind, AMWC is primarily focused on aesthetics, skin. So that means, things like fillers, shreds, needles, what else? Lasers, etc. So this is not my expertise. I don't. It's not something I understand, to be honest. So I take more of a holistic anti-aging approach. A lot of that coming from the inside, stuff that you can do, like nutrition, like physical things, like exercise, etc. Mind. Those are things that I understand, biohacking, etc. But kind of where you put a needle, where you put a shred, and how you pull it up in order to put your face up, it's not the approach I'm taking. So, but there was one company that I thought was really quite interesting. And it's a company that is international, but comes originally from the Czech Republic. And they use I've put my leaflet away, so I can't even tell you what it's called now. But do join me tomorrow, because I will share more about them tomorrow. Because what I thought was interesting is they have basically a tool, a device that uses two different energies in order to, at the same time, within a really, really short period of time, actually help it to build more muscle and reduce fat quite substantially. So I'm very, very curious to find out more about that tomorrow for you and for me. And for now, I wish you a wonderful end of the day and all the best. Stay young, have fun.